Well, I think in a world where people have a very real sense that climate change is an existential risk to civilization, and that other environmental dynamics, the loss of so many species and pollinators and dead zones in the ocean, are issues of a scale that the Roman Empire didn't have, right? British Empire didn't have. No other empire, no previous time in history had the level of technological advancement and the total population size and interconnected global supply chain and exponential tech that could make problems at this scale, truly global like this. I think people have a sense, well, these are actually existentially risking our ability to move forward. And that when we look at, we never did nuclear disarmament, and now we have the USA and North Korea in, a more heated nuclear conversation than the world has been in since the Cold War. And we have multiple nuclear-equipped superpowers again, but without the same types of mutually assured destruction, and only two superpowers that allowed it to not go to nuclear war in the past, and the mounting awareness of risk of AI. And I think people have a sense that there are issues that are a real risk to everything that we hold sacred, that we are under responding to. We're not responding to adequately, and that they are near enough term and profound enough that they can't not be dealt with. And most people, to the degree they have any awareness of it, don't know what to do about it. They don't feel like they can do anything. Back in the day, they watched Al Gore's movie, they had some sense like, okay, I can recycle, I can put LEDs in, I can, whatever. And we're looking at gigatons of carbon, and I can't touch that, and I don't know what else to do. And so one just simply tries to turn off thinking about it so they don't go crazy. But then there was an effect of turning off thinking about it, which is a background anxiety, right? And so I think in the presence of existential risk, and now I want to clarify something. People have talked about the end times for a long time, right? The rapture has been right around the corner since the 1600s or whatever. And some people love to catastrophize and talk about how everything will end on Y2K or 2012 and that is, of course, a silly phenomena, and we can look at the reasons why people do that. That is fundamentally different than the conversation around existential and catastrophic risk we're talking about now, that is associated with very real and very new phenomena. And it's important to not make this confusion and say, oh, that's just people catastrophizing. So a couple things. One, it is important to get that if people have a sense of like, shit, civilization as we know it could end, and other people are like, no, that'll never happen. Every previous civilization in the history of the planet ended. Like, we don't have Sumeria or Mesopotamia or Egypt or the Maya or the Aztec or the Inca civilizations anymore. We don't have the Roman Empire or the Ottoman or the Byzantine. And some of those lived for hundreds or thousands of years before they broke down, but they all broke down. But we weren't there for those. It's history. We think it doesn't apply to us, but each of them probably thought it didn't apply to them. So this is a super important data point people should actually pay attention to. That's one point. Next part. All of those empires were local. Even if they were big, they were still local. And if they failed, lots of other parts of the world weren't affected at all. And lots of border areas did well as a result of it. The computer I'm talking to you on right now was made on a globalized infrastructural supply chain that involved 6 continents in terms of where the metals were mined from and where the oil came from that made the plastic, where the silica that made the glass, where the software was developed. No country could make this, right? So we have this radically globally interconnected infrastructure. We have climate change is a global issue, species extinction, peak nitrogen, nuclear war, AI, these are all global issues. So we have a global civilization for the first time. That never happened before, not that long ago. And so if we look at all the previous civilizations collapsed, but they were local, now we have a global civilization, but we don't know how in the history of the world to not have a civilization collapse. We can start seeing that we have a real task ahead of us, that we need to figure out some things that we have not previously known how to do. Because the collapse of this civilization doesn't leave many unaffected areas, right? And if it is, and might leave no unaffected areas depending upon the scenario. We also, if we look at it, like many of those empires I mentioned, there are deserts now that used to not be desert because they just had unrenewable agriculture. They brought their goats to the area that ate everything and turned it into desert. So humans have been damaging the environment for a long time. But again, it was local. It wasn't like actually damaging the climate as a whole or total biomass or biodiversity of the planet, because there just weren't enough of us and we didn't have enough tech. People could do a lot of fishing in an area, but when you look at the mile-long ocean trawlers and drift nets, that level of tech is a whole different story, right? And so that's important. And then the first time we got a level of tech that could actually kill everything was the nuclear bomb, 1945, which in evolutionary time is no time ago, just a minute ago. One country had it, then just two countries had it. They were locked in mutually assured destruction. Nobody could use it. It was super expensive and hard to make a nuke, so we didn't have to worry about that. As we move forward, and we see that with weaponized drones and with CRISPR and with AI, one of the things that happens with an exponential technology is that, right, our cell phones have more computing power than the military's best supercomputers of 10 years ago. So that exponential curves also radically bring down the cost and decentralize exponential power. What we're getting is a world now where we don't just have a couple places having existential level tech that can watch what each other are doing and make sure nobody uses it, create some kind of control scenario. But we have a scenario where we can have decentralized exponential catastrophic tech. Again, this is unheard of in the history of the world. So now I deviated from thinking about individual psychopathology to, again, part of the context that could generate it, because if we have a world that has a scale of problem and a scale of risk that the world has never had, and everyone to various degrees based on awareness can feel that, and yet they don't know how to respond to it, what does that do to the well-being of the people in the society and how they behave and et cetera, and to the degree that they don't know how to deal with it, so they just shut off parts of their feeling? What are the other negative effects of shutting off parts of one's feeling? And if they also have to shut off parts of their thinking, right? So you mentioned existential angst, and I brought it here from the point of, existential risk for the planet and the existential angst that creates. We could also look at existential angst, from the point of view of just people feeling a sense of meaninglessness. And we can see that where religions gave people a sense of meaning and purpose and subjective depth and practices to actually feel transcendent experiences, but also had a whole bunch of ideas about the nature of reality that were wrong. And then we see the scientific, progression of scientific process and scientific worldview corrected a lot of the ideas that were wrong and gave an intellectually rigorous way to explore the objective world. It had also largely killed the things that were meaning creating for people and created an existential flatland of a universe that didn't feel fundamentally purposeful or meaningful. Maybe their consciousness isn't even real, or maybe their consciousness is acausal. Maybe there's no free will. Maybe there's those types of things. And so then people are stuck between having something that feels meaningful but is probably irrational, or wanting intellectual integrity but then being stuck with existential challenges to meaningfulness. And then again, it's like, I don't know what to do with that. Fuck it. Go back to hypernormal stimuli and entertainment. There is obviously a way forward that, or I'm not going to say that obviously. I would posit that there is a way forward that is not just a way of studying the objective reality, but a way of studying reality, which includes the nature of subjectivity itself more deeply, and consciousness and objectivity and the relationship between them, that is both intellectually rigorous and can give us a better way of approaching meaning and subjective depth and transcendent experiences and etc. But again, we can say largely missing. And so then we see people regress to religions because they have to, right? Or be stuck with nihilism or etc.
Absolutely. It comes back to incentive, does it, Daniel? I mean, I feel when you talk about incentive before, it's what is intrinsically incenting us. That's, I mean, as you say, we escape to this, as you see, this hypernormal stimuli because what else can we do?
What is incenting us? So when we look at all the things that contribute to human behavior, it's a lot of things, right? Our genetics and our physiology contribute to, but don't determine human behavior. Our childhood experiences and conditioning, the language we were taught, trauma, worldview, religion, definition of success, meaningfulness, all contributes to it. Financial incentive contributes to it. Systems of social status, the people that we're around, the environmental psychology. So there's a lot of things that are influencing our behavior. What we could call external and internal things, and also influencing our experience. Now, there's this core question of, well, do we want to make humans that are more resilient to their environment and have more of an internal locus of control and can actually generate more health-supporting behavior in any environment, so more sovereignty? Do we want to do that? Or do we want to work on creating healthier environments that condition the behavior of all of the individuals within the environment in fundamentally better directions? The answer is obviously both, in a positive feedback loop with each other. And, you can call this oversimplifying, but I think it's fair to say oftentimes the rational part of a political debate between the right and left is that conversation where there is a more right-leaning perspective that orients individual responsibility and a more left-orienting one that focuses on collective responsibility. And one says, hey, the left orientation, and I'm not saying that they both don't have a whole bunch of other things going on and distortion and like that, but as an essential true part, the kind of collective perspective is we know statistically that humans are conditioned by their environment, meaning that people who grow up in the ghetto versus people that grow up with good education, healthcare, parenting, etc., statistically do differently on all the things that matter. So let's work on creating social systems where people do better. And we can look at places like Finland and Denmark and say, well, they actually got some things right statistically, right? Less, less crime and less pollution and less, etc. Then we can also look at the kind of individual responsibility side and say, but we don't want individuals we don't want to start thinking of individuals just as the result of their environment and in a way that is actually taking away their sovereignty. And how do we actually condition people to be more adaptive, more resilient, more self-creating, more self-authoring? Again, the idea that this is one or the other is nonsense. Very clearly, this has to be pursued in what is the virtuous cycle between those two.